The families of the victims of the Nottingham attacker Valdo Calocane have said that services caring for the paranoid schizophrenic killer have blood on their hands. It's a damning view of a service the public rely on to keep us and those being cared for safe. It's now emerged the Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust had minimised or omitted key details of the serious risk he posed to others. A CQC review into Calocane's care found that risk assessments had been played down despite him becoming increasingly violent to others. It's another public service stretched in need of reform, and another case of that being a recipe for letting bad things slip through the net. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? How should we handle those at risk to themselves and potentially others? I wonder whether quite often we hear about damning reports, we hear about signs that were missed, and we're able in some ways to dismiss it because it doesn't affect us. But I'm sure there are many people who will have some experience of this. They will have perhaps, family members or people that they know who've been involved in this kind of care, perhaps in some way. And the question that runs through people's mind, I suppose, and makes it more pertinent is that how often does this happen? Is this a one-off or a two-off, or could this kind of terrible thing happen to any of us? And I wonder how you would answer that.
Well, if you look at the information available to us, it looks like there's around 35 homicides per year perpetrated by people with severe mental illness. So that's in England.
Mm,
So it does happen. It doesn't happen very often. That equates to around 6% of all homicides.
yeah.
And if you look internationally, I mean, people have reported somewhere between 5 and 10% of homicides in high-income countries are perpetrated by people with severe mental illness. So it's a minority of homicides, but it does happen, and it's not small enough to be negligible. I mean, this is important to prevent,
Mm.
um, and there are things that can be done to lower that risk further.
Well,
In individual cases, it's difficult to know, but I think if you take the system as a whole, we know that there are some things that can be done that can reduce the overall risk.
well, that's interesting. So let's take the some of the facts here and maybe apply them more generally. Then, if a kind of mental health team are looking after a patient and they find that this person is refusing to take their medication, has persistent symptoms of psychosis, and is increasingly violent, why might you end up doing something that means you downplay that risk?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I mean, first of all, would be that, I mean, medication has a role. I mean, we know particularly in people that take their medication, their risk is reduced.
Mm.
And these are antipsychotics. So there's a certain type of medication that's indicated for people with schizophrenia and related disorders. Um, and one of the things that can be done is you can give it in an injectable form, which lasts longer periods of time. So this is something we know that does improve people's response and their response to treatment, but also reduces their symptoms, their risk of coming back to hospital, and will reduce their risk of violence. So one would be, optimizing their medication, and depot medication is a good way of doing that. The other thing I think is in some people, hospital admission is necessary. It's necessary just to sort of figure out what's happening to make sure that they're getting the right care and the package overall works for them and gives them a little bit of time to improve, gain some insight into their condition.
Mm.
So I think um, longer inpatient admissions are indicated for some people with severe mental illness, and I think that's one other sort of lesson I think that's worth thinking
Mm.
about in relation to this case.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
think, I mean, there are also some legal there are some laws that enable you to bring people back to hospital,
right.
which are actually used quite a bit in the UK, and they can be strengthened. They can people can look at them more closely. people can use them more actively. So there are some, legal frameworks. And I think the final thing is that, and in this case, right, today, a lot of focus has gone on mental health services, but obviously the criminal justice system has a role to play, and how they can help in cases like this is another area.
I'm quite interested in this idea of kind of bringing people back into these hospitals. What is the situation with capacity there? Are there places for people, or is that another pressure?
Well, it is a pressure. I mean, I think each system will prioritize who comes in and who doesn't come in, and they'll have ways of doing that. So and the risk is that some people have to go out of area because there isn't actually inpatient beds in the local area, and that isn't good for anyone. But so there is pressure, but it can be done. And I think from a sort of broader service level perspective, I think it's important to understand that these hospitals and these inpatient units have a role, and they have an important role. And sometimes you need quite long admissions for someone to become well enough that they're safe in the community, they're safe,
Yeah.
not only in relation to themselves, but in relation to other people.
Well, of course. I mean, there's so many facts in this. That if you take one, or even if you take all five of them together, you'll think, well, hang on a second, this is ridiculous. This person was clearly a danger and should never have been kind of on the streets. For example, the fact that his family, Valdo Calocane's family, repeatedly raised concerns about his deteriorating mental health. He'd been sectioned 4 times in less than 2 years. I suppose the worst one, perhaps, but maybe, again, away from the hyperbole, you'll have a different opinion on this, that there was a psychiatrist who was so worried about his illness that they had told a meeting of health professionals that, and I quote, perhaps Valdo will end up killing someone. Now, again, I'm not familiar with this kind of sector, but if someone says something like that in a meeting, does it have a weight? Does it have an impact, or is this something that's said and kind of nothing? It's not acted upon.
No, I think it does have it does have an impact. I've never seen that written down in my experience. I've worked for more than 20 years in forensic services, which are the sort of higher risk end of the spectrum. So, I mean, I think if someone does write something like that does have a weight that will be taken seriously. I would imagine that was taken very seriously. Um, but I mean, it has to be more than just people writing things down in notes. I mean, you have to act on them, and it has to be based on something. And I think one of the questions here, and I think the Care Quality Commission has raised this, is whether the risk assessments were done in a consistent way, in a structured way, and that's important. So systems need to be put in place that that when statements like this are made, they're supported by a sort of consistent, structured way of making sense of someone's past history and their
Yeah.
risk forward, and then a plan's put in place that is more than just if someone doesn't engage, they're discharged to their GP, which seems to be what happened after Calocane's fourth
Yes.
admission, which I think is difficult. So I think yeah, there needs to be plans in place which can deal with someone not adhering to their treatment plan,
Okay. Thank
possibly
you.
using laws to help enforce hospital admission and also treatment.
Well, that is interesting. Thank you very much for talking to us. That's Seena Fazel, who is Professor of Forensic Psychiatry at the University of Oxford.